Greetings, everyone. Welcome to a final Friday in February, where it's warming up, and we have to look forward to what might be 70-degree weather next week. But don't blink, because I'm sure it'll snow right after that. I want to welcome you to the School of Education and Human Sciences Research and Teaching Festival. Name comes from actually Tom DeLuca, who said, why are we calling it a conference? We should call it something more celebratory. So we added the word festival several years ago. So thank you to Tom for having us do that. We have 9 presenters who are each going to share a short snippet of their work. One slide, 5 minutes, with some 5 minutes for question and answer. And so I'm very excited that they have volunteered or been voluntold to participate in this. And I'm really thrilled. I think you'll be really excited to hear what they have to say. I want to just take a moment to express my, on behalf of the school, but just express my heartfelt support to those folks who are from Ukraine or have family that are there, or who are from that region of the country, and for all of us for what's going on in the world. I just know it's a very difficult time for many folks, and I just want to make sure people know that we are in spirit here for them, and if they need resources, if they want to reach out to those of us in the Dean's office for support and or international student services, I'm sure there will be some programming or some additional things that the university will be doing to provide some level of support in a difficult time. So I just want to make sure that I said that, and it's very sincere. I have a daughter who is currently not in that part of Eastern Europe, but is in Eastern Europe, and I know how difficult this is right now. So I just want to at least say that. I don't pretend that all things are normal in the world when they're not. And in fact, we're on Zoom instead of face-to-face. I had kind of hoped that we would be face-to-face at this point in time, but not quite, not quite there yet. So we'll do this one more year in this way, and hope that we will all be together face-to-face soon. Rick, you have a minute if you'd like to say a greeting to our folks before we get started.
Not really necessary. I'll make a couple of comments at the end by summary, but again, we've been talking about it. Our hearts are certainly with all of our colleagues that have ties to Ukraine, or family in Ukraine, or anybody in Eastern Europe. And it's a difficult time here for a lot of reasons, and it's a really, really harsh time in that part of the world. So we're really glad you're here. This is an important part of what we do. And Lisa, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, great. So as you see from the I can't hand out the order, but if you got from the publicized order, we're going to start with Susan Harvey. We're going to pretty much follow the pattern that of 5 minutes and then 5 Q&A. Please just jump in on the Q&A. Folks, I'll have a timer, so you'll likely hear a beep or I'll move my arms or something like that. I will give folks, like, I'll do a 2 minute, 1 minute. That'll be my sign.
Zoom needs that like electronic hook feature. I think you're working on that.
I think I can mute you all if I need to. But
yeah, all right, okay.
But I don't really want to go there. You all can. Some of you have sent me your slides, and that's fine. I'll put them up and do share screen. If not, all of the presenters have the ability to share their screen if they'd like to. But we do have one switch in order in case you're here for a particular person. The group, Sean Smith, Amber Rowland, et cetera, who are supposed to be at 2:25. Sean has to catch a plane, so he is swapped with Brian Mann. So that's one, there's one little swap in the thing here, you'll see that. So anyway, I welcome everybody, and without further ado, I turn it over to Dr. Susan Harvey. You're on.
All right, can everybody see my screen? Okay, all right, here we go. All right, good afternoon, everybody, and happy Friday. My name is Susan Harvey. I'm an assistant professor of community health at HSES. And today I'm going to present evaluation results of a nutrition incentive program for SNAP participants. So I won't go into a lot of detail, but everybody here probably has heard of SNAP, formerly the food stamp program. It is the largest federal food safety net program for low income and food insecure individuals. It's been a particularly helpful resource for millions of individuals during the pandemic. So I just want to throw up some numbers here. Keep in mind, though, these are from 2019 and early 2020, so before the pandemic. So in 2019, the maximum benefit for a family of 4 who are receiving SNAP benefits was $642. Now, keep in mind, SNAP does stipulate that 30% of individuals' income should be spent on their own food purchases. So really, the average amount in 2019 that a family of 4 received was $240 per month. So one of the things that the literature has been really consistent with, as well as our own research, is that people who are enrolled in SNAP, they consistently suffer from poor diet quality. So a lower consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables and a higher consumption of processed fatty food items. As a result of this, they're more likely to suffer from diet-related diseases, malnutrition, and obesity. And one of the commonly cited challenges to purchasing fresh fruits and vegetables is the cost to purchase such items. So in the last few years, there's been a growth in nutrition incentive programs to target these individuals as a way to hopefully help them afford to purchase more fresh fruits and vegetables, and then for them in turn to consume those food items. So one such nutrition incentive program, hopefully you guys recognize this logo if you've ever been to any of our farmers markets or you shop at Price Choppers, is the Double Up Food Bucks program. So in 2016, we received USDA funding to implement and evaluate this program throughout a bi-state region of Kansas and Missouri. And so this program doubles the value of benefits that SNAP participants receive. So for example, an individual goes up to the market booth at the farmer's market and they can request up to $25 of SNAP tokens. So they'll receive those SNAP tokens, but then on top of that, up to $25, they'll receive an additional $25 worth of tokens to be spent specifically on fresh fruits and vegetables. So it's a win-win. It's a win for SNAP participants, and then it's also a win for local farmers as well. Preliminary data results from these programs indicate that it has improved fruit and vegetable consumption. But as a result, with our evaluation, we wanted to explore some different variables as well. So the purpose of this specific study today that I'll report on is we wanted to understand if individuals who were enrolled with SNAP combined with a nutrition incentive program, if it had an impact on food security status, if it improved fruit and vegetable consumption. And then we also wanted to explore indicators of health-related quality of life, both from a physical health standpoint and a mental health standpoint. So I've got this table here, and I know this is a lot going on, so let me try to just point out some of our most notable findings. So over about a 2-year period, we collected about 377 surveys from SNAP participants. And so what was, I think, really important to note here, that out of those 377, over 2/3 of them still reported being food insecure. And this is the result of being part of SNAP combined with a nutritional incentive program. So this made us wanted to explore differences between those that reported being food secure and those that reported food insecurity still. So real quickly, I want to point out just servings of fruits and vegetables. No differences between the two groups, but still they're not meeting those recommended dietary guidelines for Americans. I think what was most striking for us is the disparity between the groups and those quality of life measures. So you can see here the number, these were significantly different between the two groups. So the number of physically unhealthy days and mentally unhealthy days that were reported by food insecure individuals, this is per month. And so also down here, this last number, the number of days poor health kept them from participating in usual activities, such as self-care, such as work, such as recreational activities. And so I think it's important to really note here that this is about a week out of a month. And SNAP is supposed to provide temporary assistance. So this makes it difficult for those individuals to get out of that rut. So this points to larger environmental, more complex issues that certainly need to be explored further as well. So we have been really fortunate to receive additional funding for this project. So we're going to continue to study this over the next 4 years as well. The Biden administration did approve the largest increase in SNAP benefits last year, $36 per person. It'll be interesting to see if that has an impact on food security status and overall health and wellness for these individuals. So we're going to continue to study that, as well as some of our more vulnerable populations, such as elderly individuals and single mothers. So we're excited to continue evaluating this. We've been lucky to get more funding. And with that, I would love to open it up to questions.
Great. Susan, do you want to stop sharing here?
Sure.
All right, that'd be great. And questions either in the chat, or feel free to ask questions by just unmuting. Cynthia applauds you, yay.
Thank you.
Riva, question?
So I'm curious about how you might weave these findings into work with, for instance, pre-service teachers. What do they need to know when they're facing kids whose families are in this situation?
Yeah, boy. So part of our study, that's a great question, Riva, because more and more we've seen from the literature how food insecurity also impacts academic performance. And teachers already have so many other things to think about, but I think it is important to understand that connection between learning, overall health, and diet quality and food security status of children. So I don't know if it's so much pre-service teachers, but maybe working from that top down of having an understanding at that administrative level. I also think, part of what we're evaluating with this study is the communication efforts of the Double Up Food Bucks program. And one thing that's made it really difficult is schools are hesitant to receive information about these programs, and we don't know why. We don't understand why. So they're not getting this information, at the school level, which I think would be important for school administrators and teachers to also know that these are programs that are available for individuals and families. So I don't know if it's so much at the teacher level, but more coming down from that top-down approach at that administrative level of making teachers more aware, administrators being more aware of providing more services at the school level as well, localized food pantries, some of those school garden programs that could maybe funnel healthier food items in children's backpacks to get home to families. So I think there's a lot of implications for this research, just overall for us in higher education, as well as at secondary and primary education levels as well. I love your question, Riva. I wish I had a better answer for it. It's so complex. But again, I always think in public health, we think of that upstream approach. How do we change the environment so that it eventually trickles down to that individual change as well?
Susan, we have time for one more quick question. And the question is, quickly, are there comparisons with non-SNAP participants? So as we understood it, the F1 and the FS groups were both SNAP.
They were both SNAP. Yes. Yeah. No. So we have not made comparisons between non-SNAP participants. There's a lot of individuals out there that don't qualify for SNAP because they make too much, but yet they rely on federal food assistance programs. So for our particular study, we didn't draw comparisons from non-SNAP participants. No, I haven't, as far as if the literature has or not, I haven't seen that. Overall, what we have seen is that if you are on SNAP or if you suffer from food insecurity, overall, your overall diet quality is much poorer. And then there's physical and mental health repercussions, ramifications because of that. But that's another good question.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for being a good
Thanks,
model
guys.
on this. And I will turn it over to Hae-Sun Cho. And I think I am sharing my screen for her. So Hae-Sun, why don't you take it away while I host participant screen sharing. Wait, I'm having trouble sharing my screen. It's not letting me do so.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Hae-Sun Cho, Associate Professor of TESOL in Curriculum and Teaching. I'm going to talk about one of my upcoming books. The title is Transnational Language Teacher Identities in TESOL, Identity Construction Amongst Female International Students in the US. This book is co-authored by two former TESOL PhD students, Rim Al-Samiri and Jun Gao. So, who are transnational students? They are also known as international students in higher education. A recent Open Doors survey shows that there are a little over 1 million international students enrolled in US. That's not my slide.
This one, transnational. Okay, keep going. I'll fix it. Keep going.
Okay. Do you get my slide now?
Yep, hold on, working on it.
However, we prefer the term transnational over international because of the fluid and hybrid in-between identities of the students that we portrayed in the book. We explored the perspectives and experiences of 13 transnational graduate students from Korea, Japan, China, and Saudi Arabia. These female students were enrolled in TESOL graduate programs across the country. We looked at their transnational experiences in the US and also when they returned to their home country. Using narrative analysis, we identified several challenges the participants faced in the US, as well as the ways in which they enacted their agency as students, teachers, and mothers. Each participant grew up as the racial and linguistic majority in the countries of origin. So the imposition of the minority identity on them was unsettling to them when they first moved to the US for their graduate studies. They often felt marginalized as non-native speakers of English, and in turn, they perceived themselves and were perceived by others as legitimate members of the academic community. However, they challenged the reductionist perspectives and contested the US-based curriculum in higher education through narratives, especially in a classroom where they had a professor with similar racial and linguistic background. One of the major themes emerged from the data involves gender roles, especially motherhood, a theme fundamental to identity negotiation for our participants. The women, for example, one of the participants talked about her fear of being judged for missing a class because of her pregnancy issues. She said, when I was pregnant, it was so difficult for me to go to class, but I always wanted to go because I don't want them to say, oh, Saudi students are very spoiled, they are lazy. I wanted to show them that we are as good as you and as good as any other student. Another Saudi woman shared her story. I miscarried one of my babies there in the US, and I needed to pick up my daughter from school. My husband was out of town. I had no one. Can you imagine? I miscarried at 2:30 p.m. and 3 p.m. I'm in my daughter's school. When I went to pick her up, I wore sunglasses because I was crying. I wasn't crying in pain. I was crying about my situation. On the other hand, motherhood also enables students to learn more about educational issues discussed in their graduate classroom. One participant said, the Korean and the US education systems are so different, but I'm learning new ways of doing things at school, not just learning something in the classroom. I learned so many things about American school system, by being a mom to my sons. Based on the findings, this book offers several implications for faculty and administrators in higher education. As faculty, we should contest the essentialization of transnational students, reimagine our curriculum by incorporating their expertise and needs into our instruction, use narratives as a pedagogical tool. University administrators should focus on diversifying faculty and student populations, providing academic and social support for graduate student mothers, and building partnerships with K-12 schools in the community. In conclusion, taking the transnational perspective in identity research can not only inform analysis of the fluid dynamic process of identity negotiation, but also can help us conceptualize transnational students as social agents whose impact transcends their geographical and institutional boundaries. Thank you.
My humble apologies about the share. Good job. I did figure it out, I think, eventually. So, all right. Questions for Hasan about her research project? Hasan, did you say it was coming out as a book? Or
Yes, it's in press.
It's in press. That's exciting. When will it hit the book stands?
Summer this year.
That's
Can you see
exciting.
the screen?
Yes, we can now see the screen.
Yes, so that's the book coming out very soon.
Wonderful. Congratulations. All right, questions?
Thank you.
From folks?
I was hoping, I'm really intrigued by the use of the word transnational. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that point, because it was really abbreviated, and I think it's really a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. We chose this term transnational because we believe in between hybrid students. They are not just foreign students, foreign students to the US community, academic communities. When they go back, they do go back and forth and bring their knowledge across borders. So instead of international students being just like foreigner to the US academic institution, we wanted to emphasize their transnational fund of knowledge, their expertise across borders, because they do bring so much to the US classroom, but also their knowledge gained from the graduate programs in the US can be utilized in their teaching in their home country. So again, the dynamic process of identity negotiation was the key component in this book.
Hasan, do you want to stop? You're sharing. I think you want to stop sharing so we can see everybody.
Oh, okay.
Now we finally figured out share. Great, thank you. And any other questions? Riva?
So I'm wondering how you might use these results both in our program at KU and also to inform the other folks like you at other universities that offer programs similar to ours.
As I mentioned in the talk, I do believe that diversifying our faculty and student populations is important, but also transnational students didn't have a lot of opportunities to teach in the US K-12 classroom settings. So that's why we argue for maintaining partnerships with K-12 schools in the community so they can have more classroom opportunities. Because a lot of times they didn't get GTAship because the lack of their K-12, US K-12 teaching experience. So I think we definitely need to provide more support for transnational students, both academic and social support, because they found the communities around them really beneficial for their professional growth.
Thank you so much, Hasan. All right, I think we're gonna keep moving up forward. So next up we have Riva Friedman. Go.
Hi, can I share my screen?
You should be able to.
Let's,
I obviously can't, but but yes, you should. I think I've given you permission to do that.
uh-oh. Allow the apps below. It should let me, right?
You should be able to now.
Okay, let me try again. No.
Aspen, what do we do? I don't know.
Gosh, she's set up as a co-host.
Yeah, it's my computer.
Oh, okay.
I'm working on it even as we speak.
Can you do it with that? It's just one side. Can we do it without it?
No. Actually, I could.
Reva, why don't you send Lisa an email and she'll post it while you're talking.
Okay. I could just send it to her right this second.
Okay, and I will do my best to open it up.
Actually, I have another
Okay, I just want to.
computer up.
The hard part is mindful of time, so if we.
Yes.
Want me to jump in now and then Reva gives you an
Wait,
extra
I
10
got
minutes?
it. I think I got it.
Oh, okay.
No. Click lock to make changes.
I'm happy to jump in now, Reva. That just gives you 10 minutes to problem solve.
Yeah, let's.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and I'll fix it.
All
Yes.
right, so Sean is jumping in. He's going to go catch a plane and look. Good job, Sean. All right, go.
All right. So hello, everybody. Sean Smith here. I'm presenting for a few people. I'm presenting for, I didn't turn my camera off before I got on, so I won't worry about that. But I'm presenting for Amber Rowland, who's a wonderful colleague and a researcher, associate researcher with the Center for Research on Learning, and also presenting for Bruce Fry, who's a wonderful colleague in the School of Education as well. And so, and health sciences, my apologies. So the one slide, I'm keeping it to one slide as directed. And so there's a lot going on here. The project we're talking about is something called VOICE. Yes, acronym, excuse me, phonetically you'd say VOS, but it's the virtual reality opportunities to implement social skills. It's work that involves several different things. And so it will all be represented here. It will not be all represented here. But what you do have are two different elements. You have voice, which is that first column, which is this screen here, as well as these avatars. And then you have voice advisor, which you have some screenshots here, which I'll discuss in just a moment. The work itself originates out of work. I was fortunate to begin, over a decade ago, focusing on social skill and social skill development for individuals that have social skill deficits. Now, of course, today in the pandemic, we're talking about lots of kiddos in the K through 12, lots of students in the K through 12 environment that have social skill deficits, social emotional needs. Our target audience to begin with was individuals on the autism spectrum disorder, which a primary audience of that group, one of their primary characteristics is social competence challenges. Of course, a lot of individuals with disabilities, learning disabilities, ADHD, et cetera, also have challenges when it comes to social skill deficits. And so with all that said, we focused in on individuals with disabilities, but we focused in on an app, a web-based experience to help them with these social skill deficits. And so that's the first column here. And so what we've done is we've developed across 10 social skill domains, a number of different solutions in respect to the deficits in terms of those areas. And part of it is I want to share it with you so you hear these pauses, but the skinny of it is these 10 social skill domains are everything from self-awareness to advocacy to self-care and safety. Inside those domains, we have a series of scenarios, 140 plus. So for example, right here, you're seeing several different scenarios. Okay, excuse me, these domains right here, okay? And inside these domains, like expressive communication, you'll have a dozen to 25 different scenarios. And scenarios are experiences that students would go through to learn about everything from, again, social communication, social competence, et cetera, et cetera. The scenarios themselves have assessments as you go along. They stop the individual and ask them a series of questions. So what does the individual see? The individual goes through hallways, classrooms, cafeterias, physical education environments, and sees a variety of avatars. They're asked a series of questions. They have to respond in a certain way. And in a way, as many of the students talk about it, it's a bit of a game. But as they're going through, they're gaining knowledge and understanding on basic social competence. Our research over the years has shown that significant difference development, as well as a number of other features I'll talk about in just a moment. I could go on and on and on about the actual app. It sits on the Google Play. It sits on the iPad. It also sits in Oculus. And if you were to download it, you'll have right now options for 3 demonstrations, but you will hear the wonderful soothing voice of Dr. Bruce Fry, who narrates a lot of this from an explicit instruction perspective. The second component here is the voice advisor. So a lot of challenges in social emotional development, social skill development, is the fact that maybe students gain an understanding, but they can't apply it. They can't generalize it across settings. And so we created what's called Voice Advisor. That's for the educator. Everything from screening the students to understand where they begin in the Voice app, to monitoring their progress as they move through the experience, and that monitors how well they do with questions, how much time it takes them, where they visit, et cetera, et cetera. But more importantly, it gives them evidence-based solutions for them to practice with the students in the real world once they've gained a knowledge and understanding of the basic elements of social skills. So the app is gearing towards the basic knowledge development, and the Voice Advisor looks to practice and facilitate. We have a series of lesson plans. We have a series of videos that introduce evidence-based practices, illustrate them in the classroom. We have case stories that facilitate each of the domains through the eyes of a teacher and a student to further understand not only how to practice, but also to generalize these learned social skills. We have, and I'm going to stop sharing here, we have conducted a series of research studies over the years. The most recent series of studies have looked at levels of immersion. And so in virtual reality, you have levels of immersion in terms of full immersion with the Oculus and all that, or just simply on the iPad and the Google Chrome. Now, of course, iPad and Google Chrome, those are more available in the school environments. But that study, for example, showed significant development in knowledge and understanding and acquisition of social skills, but did not show significant development across the levels of immersion. So therefore, students in the Google Chrome and the iPad learn just as well as students in the fully immersive Oculus, which was pretty cool for us because although the Oculus is a cool technology, not a lot of folks have a chance to be fully immersed with those headsets because of cost and access. So, and then of course, we've collected data in terms of ongoing development, maintenance, things of that nature. That's been published in a series of different publications. We've written literature reviews on virtual reality, our team on this. And this is funded, as I mentioned earlier, by the U.S. Department of Ed. I don't think I did mention, it's funded by the U.S. Department of Ed, Office of Special Education Programs. So I think that's within the timeline that you want me to do, Lisa, yes?
That is what I want you to do. Now we're going to take a minute or two for some questions, and we're still on time, so we're good.
Good. And I did that
All
with
right.
a loss of a minute or two to get started, Lisa.
We did. We're good. We're still on time. Questions for Sean? How do students know that this exists, Sean? I mean, do they?
Well, right now we're in a
hear about
development
it?
stage still,
Okay.
and so we're working with teachers, and then the teachers are making it available to the students. So we have dozens of teachers, educators, I should say, working across, the Midwest as well as portions of the rest of the United States, working with us to give us feedback on the advisor element, and then their students are using it. We'll have full-blown access beginning in August. It's a free app at the present time. And then once we've developed and made full exposure, it may come into pay, or the advisor may have a pay element. But right now it's fully available as long as they play with us. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
Sean, is this something that you think that parents might be able to access to work with your kids outside of the school setting?
Very much so. Overall, to me, virtual reality offers a lot of opportunities in terms of simulation, a safe place to learn lots of different skills. It's very virtual and it's very visual in its learning. So we've had parents participate in this. The first time we used this years ago, we tested it with students. We were at an offsite here in Lawrence, and parents would come in with their children would interact with it. And most of the parents would stop us and say, "Excuse me, go out to the car and get their other child with autism and bring them in and test them with them as well." So the parents have been very interested in this as well. So yeah, and in the independent use, they download the app, they can use it as they see fit. The screener sits there and it's available to them as well. Our target audience right now are educators, but we definitely have been planning in respect to other adoption use, including parents. And our hope is that with the virtual reality, it can go across lots of different issues as well as environments beyond just social emotional development. So.
Thank you, Sean, and colleagues for doing that. We appreciate it. And
thanks for having us.
Safe flight, Sean.
Yeah, thanks for letting me go early.
You're welcome. All right, we have multiple ways of doing this. If
I am going to try. I have a new computer and it just wasn't hooked up to Zoom the way the other one is. Okay, let's see. Whoops, if I'm actually sharing.
I'll tell you when you're sharing. And then
Okay.
Yep, you're sharing, Reba.
Yay.
All right, I'm starting your time. Go for it.
Okay. So you may know that I with the encouragement of Kelly and Kelly Thomas and Steve White, I recreated CNT 100, which is the prequel and now in the beginning of our teacher ed program. And, you know, our students treat the whole idea of discussing biases as a bias is a negative word, and they avoid it, and they say I'm colorblind, which we know they're not. But the question for me is, how do I help students use the course to help students examine where they come from and the values, their inheritance of values, without triggering that feeling of possible shame or embarrassment or social desirability, the need to fake goodwill. So that's why. But I think it's important to prepare the students for the work they'll be doing next. So when we don't talk about biases, that's the elephant in the living room. Seeing the elephant is the 19th century expression. The elephant was the biggest animal in the circus and required some courage. So to see life, to gain knowledge by experience, but not their direct experience. So I wanted to make this more comfortable for students by starting them off with listening to the stories of symbolic models. So I have here, I don't know if you can see this actually, from the New York Times YouTube channel, we have the OpDoc series, which are the stories of individuals from a variety of racial ethnic backgrounds telling their stories. I use this because they openly talk about stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination without being whiny or blaming. They talk about the effects on their identities, and they identify microaggressions, which is something the students have already studied. So then the students unpack those stories, and we apply what they're learning to the next piece, which is how do they create an identity-safe classroom? How do they behave? These are from TED Talks that the students had already viewed. How do they create an identity-safe classroom? There, use Learning for Justice. Color Brave is a TED Talk from Melody Hobson. Every Child Needs a Champion is Rita Pearson's talk. They take a lesson from Learning for Justice, and then what would you do? They use that series to identify a microaggression that relates to the group that they're studying, and to use the courageous conversation framework to create a conversation. And by then, they have enough distance so they can see themselves located in this conversation without identifying themselves as having to be a certain person, but to acknowledge that they come with values, they see the world a certain way, and then they reflect. And that the best thing to do is to have an open conversation. So I just wanted to add a few of their comments. As a teacher committed to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, I want to be humble, prepared to learn, and that's kind of common. The best analogy that fits my identity statement is I will be like a jazz musician. I will be listening, complimenting, and responding. I will be flexible, adaptable, and ready to learn in the moment. And that was a common theme, is to be have more of an open mind, a beginner's mind, and to let the students tell them what they need, and also to elicit that. Another student writes she wants to be like a juggler. We have band leaders and in addition to the usual, gardeners and chefs. And they work on an identity statement and an analogy throughout the semester in each new context. So by the time the course ends, they're ready to look at their belief system. That's it.
Great. Well, let's unshare. I think just hit the bottom and then let's take questions. Thank you so much for that. And you are a little under time, so that's exciting. Cynthia, you had a question.
I have one. Reva, first, thanks for sharing that with us. There's this uptick in legislation across the US limiting teachers' abilities to talk openly about race and talk openly about anti-racism. I wonder what feedback you've gotten from your students about those legislation, the legislation they're encountering, and just kind of your thoughts about it.
I invited Nick Mitchell, one of our newer colleagues, to come and talk to my class just about that as all of this was breaking last fall. And he was very clear in differentiating between critical race theory and discussing living racism. And his belief, which the students had already experienced now, is that it's more important to live your beliefs than talk about them. And this whole experience was around living through the eyes of someone else. I'm not going to use it. They're not walking in their shoes, but they're walking alongside them and using knowledge to address the situation. So it removes the whole, we did talk about the 1619 curriculum, but not in the context of politics. Does that answer your question, Cynthia?
Other questions for Reva? Have you found students pretty responsive to this, Reva,
In this iteration, I've been teaching this course for about 8 years now, and each time I would try a different approach and try to go a level deeper. This was a very structured, rigidly guided discovery process where they had each of those items was a template and a slide where they were directed to a certain resource to use. So they were constructing knowledge, but within a very clear framework, so they didn't feel like they were floundering. And the feedback was very positive. I was pleased. A number of them actually said, we want to have another class period so we can do a courageous conversation. And I was happy. Using the TV series, What Would You Do, was helpful because it wasn't about them. When I tried to have the students do role plays, it died. But using someone else's scene, especially something off television, anything that they could view as a video, allowed them to identify more without risking themselves.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, on to Ashley Herda. We're going to talk about muscle atrophy. I like this because we bounce around ideas here.
Can you see my slide?
I can.
Awesome. Okay. Should stay on time here. I'm Ashley Herda, assistant professor in exercise physiology, exercise science, and HSES. The research School of Ed and Human Sciences GRF supported was with using a diagnostic ultrasound device to quantify muscle atrophy following orthopedic knee surgery. So I've been in collaboration with a group of orthopedic surgeons, physical therapists, athletic trainers through the Med Center and some of their facilities over here near the Edgewards campus where I'm housed. And our project includes mostly ACL reconstruction patients. Some of them have meniscal repair, MPFL, other knee involved architecture that has some sort of surgical repair. In the time from when injury occurs to the time of surgical intervention can be anywhere from 4 days to 12 months. It really depends on the individual, the severity of the injury, the level of play or competition phase an athlete, if they're an athlete, might be in, or sometimes it's less sport-specific general population. So I can advance my slide. It's still the same slide. It's just an overlay. using the ultrasound, we measure the thigh muscles as the individual goes from injury consultation to surgery and incrementally through physical therapy as prescribed by their physician. So here we have pre, which is before they had surgery, but after they have an injury, 2 weeks post, 6 weeks, 12 weeks post-operative, and then at return to sport. So again, that depends on the type of injury and surgery they have, and that can be anywhere between 5 to 9 months post-operative. And so what we did here, we measured 3 of the quadriceps muscles. There's 4 quad muscles in the front of the thigh, and then also 3 hamstrings on the back side of the leg. The data here is only one muscle, the rectus femoris, and that one's on the very top middle of your leg. So with this, we see the changes that are most prominent in the quadriceps versus the hamstrings, but that also depends on the surgical procedure that is done, if they have a patellar graft or hamstring graft for that repair. But generally, as we follow these patients in the operative leg versus the non-operative leg, following injury but pre-surgically, there's already some sort of muscle change. We also track body composition, and depending on the amount of swelling in the limb, that alters the estimation of muscle mass with a BIA, which is a bioelectrical impedance analysis. It tells us how much muscle and fat there is in the whole body and then in each individual limb. 2 weeks post-operatively, the non-operative leg is hovering around baseline yet, but the pre-op or the operative limb has lost over 15% of their muscle mass in that muscle specifically. So this is where the big impairments start to happen. At that point, they're usually still non-weight bearing. They're on crutches. They're learning how to walk again with this injury as it's been repaired. And at the same time, we follow them after 2 weeks, 6 weeks. They start to get their muscle back. But if you compare 6 weeks to pre, they're still 10% below the pre-op muscle mass. And by 12 weeks, they're still 7% below pre-op muscle mass, even though they've regained it a little bit from the previous measurement that we've conducted. By the time they do get to return to sport, their overall improvement is close to baseline, but it's still a little bit of a deficit from when they didn't have surgery in the first place. Whereas in the non-operative limb, they are back to where they started, if not better. So the problem we're looking at now, and different grants have submitted since then, hopefully we'll get more funding and support, is that if they're cleared to return to sport, but they still have some sort of a deficit, how do we make them better? And what kinds of interventions can we introduce along the way to make sure that not as much muscle loss is happening in those operative limbs? And I think I'm right around my 5 minutes. And I need to stop sharing.
Nice job on your timing and nice presentation. So I'm having some slight PTSD because I have a.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It feels like not that long ago, but many years ago, I broke my patella and had to have my knee operated on. And to this day, my left leg is smaller than my right. Like I never, it atrophied and never. Well, I mean, I could. Anyway. Interesting.
I just had a total replacement. I feel the same thing. It's just throbbing now. Just support.
Ashley, I'm sorry you're creating such mental anguish for people.
I know. I'm sorry.
But I thought was a wonderful presentation. Let me ask a question. Does this suggest, and I apologize for my naivete about this, but does this suggest that in the postoperative realm, you have to have a very different kind of exercise regimen for the operative leg versus the non-operative leg? I mean, that's what strikes me through this.
Yeah, so they actually, and I'm over there all the time, so I can see the athletes going through these physical therapy sessions. They usually do the same thing on both limbs. just to make sure the non-operative limb is not doing nothing, because there is still that use it or lose it. But after, I think around the 12-week mark, they seem to be able to do more jumping and strength specific training. And hopefully, if we can alter that a little bit more, and depending on the trends that the physical therapists are seeing, they can have a more aggressive approach to grow the muscle back. We'll see better improvements over time.
And there's athletes, especially if they're college athletes or pro athletes, this is their job. They're going to spend a lot of time on this. For the Cynthias and Lisas of the world, who we've put back into therapy. I mean, what does a normal person do in terms of this? They don't have the time, probably not somebody over their shoulder helping them, etc.
They probably don't. I think for a lot of them, we start to lose their compliance with physical therapy at about 18 weeks, whereas the athletes go beyond 32 weeks. So they're getting almost half the amount of rehab that other people that are maybe more determined or have like a specific sport specific goal in mind. The age range for these participants that we've been measuring is 14 years old to 34. And the 34-year-old is a cardiac nurse. So she may not have finished all of the sessions that she would have wanted to, and has a less sport specific desirability to get back to athletic condition.
Any other questions? All right, we're at a quick break time. Why don't we, it is currently, what time is it? 1:51. Let's come back at 1:55 and we'll start up again. So go ahead and stretch your legs and grab a bite to eat or something to drink and come back in a couple minutes. Thank you, everyone. All right. Cynthia, my friend, can you?
I knew that this would happen. The UPS guy came as soon as it was time for me to present. So the dogs are going bananas right now, but I think we'll be okay.
I can't hear any dogs. So
all right. Well, my daughter just frantically put them outside because we're working like a team over here. So I'm ready to go.
All right, go for it.
So you should be able to see my screen, Principles of Good Video Game-Based Learning. My name is Cynthia Murchak, and I am a newly minted associate teaching professor in the Department of Special Education, and I'm super happy to be here. I'm here to share with you a few of James G's video game-based learning principles that contribute to the design and the implementation of the capstone course of the Leadership in Special and Inclusive Education Graduate Certificate Program in the Department of Special Ed. In this course, students are positioned to draw upon all of the learning and content they experienced in the previous courses of the graduate certificate and apply them to a team-based adventure in the virtual school district of Valeria. So instead of asking students to write a paper, complete a project, or build a portfolio, we ask students to take on a virtual avatar and participate in a quest to save the district of Valeria from imminent doom. In other words, the virtual district is about to be sued by the ACLU as they demand that the school district improve outcomes and reduce achievement gaps for students of color with disabilities from low socioeconomic groups. So on your screen, you can see 16 of G's gaming principles, and the list has since been expanded, but I only have 5 minutes, so that's what we're going to look at. I'm going to share how the first activity of the course, I'm going to share the first activity of the course. And in sharing what happens, I hope you'll be able to see how some of these highlighted principles manifest and how they're built into the process, thereby expanding students' learning. So as the students arrive in Valeria, they're told that they have been handpicked by the brand new superintendent, Ms. O'Mealy Nelson, who has been tasked with turning around the district of Valeria. They're the new district leadership team. And much like in real life, when you show up at a new job, nobody tells you exactly what to do. Your first thing is to figure out the lay of the land, to familiarize yourself with what's happening, both good and bad in the system. And their first directive as a team is to review mounds of data. Boy, do I pile it on them. And it's all pulled from the real life district of Detroit. And they have to submit a systems report to the superintendent, as well as what they plan as their first tasks as a team. And I've taught this class several times now, and it is fascinating because different groups all pick up on different aspects of the district's data. And this particular group that I'm about to share about decided that their first action was to develop a brand new inclusive mission and vision for the district, which they drafted and submitted to the superintendent for approval. They also submitted a plan for dissemination to all the schools in the district, and including teachers and principals, as well as the community. And now in a regular class, the instructor might read through their draft and give them written feedback and maybe a grade. But in this class, I'm not just the instructor, I'm the game master. Instead, I get to respond. And I responded this time with a local news station reporting that there were over 100 parents, students, teachers, and community members who were protesting outside of the district office with signs that said things like, "Nothing about us without us," and "We need a voice in decisions," and "Why do you get to decide what's good for our kids?" So instead of just reminding our students about the readings that we engage student voice in reform efforts, and we include and partner with parents and caregivers, I responded in the context of the game with an event that prompts them to have to respond. And as the students navigate the game by making different decisions, they have to work collaboratively, they make shared decisions, they have to do all the things that contribute to effective inclusive leadership. So perhaps the most challenging principle is the one making it pleasantly frustrating. So just as with any video game, like Wordle or Candy Crush or even Pac-Man, the game gets harder as your player skills are enhanced. So if it's too easy, the game isn't fun to play. But if it's too hard, the participants want to give up. So the flexibility that this game provides and the organic development of events in the game offers me the chance to keep them engaged and interested, while also allowing me to scaffold and remediate when necessary. So I'm really interested in how gaming can push our classrooms, particularly those that are online, into the new frontier. 5 minutes, right? Bam, nailed it.
Nailed it. Like that was like to the seconds.
Thank you. I practiced.
Wow.
Dr. G is down the road at Arizona State University because I'm coming to you live from Arizona as I am remote faculty.
Dr. G has been here as well, so
Yep.
we appreciate that. So yeah, so I wanted to be clear that when we organized this research and teaching festival, it was designed to hear both about what people are doing in the classroom, as well as what people are doing in their labs and in their research areas. So Cynthia both Reva and Cynthia were great to share what's happening in their classrooms. Questions for Cynthia? I'm sort of fascinated by this because I do a lot of case studies, but I tried to make them real, but I don't feel like they're real enough. Maybe I need to show up with signs. Instead of written feedback on a paper, maybe I need to say the protesters are here.
Cynthia, maybe you can talk a little,
fun.
Cynthia, maybe you can talk a little bit about the time it takes to create these game situations. I mean, many of our people have worked with case study. I see Dorothy's going to speak soon. She had an award-winning case study years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, but talk about gaming and what that takes to, create a class for a game and
Yeah.
what kind of skill sets you might need. And I mean, you have Jayhawkville in the online space that might lend itself to with this, etc.
Right. It is a really different experience because one of the things that is difficult about it is that I've taught it multiple times, but it's different every time. I don't know what the students are going to kind of create, and as a team, what decisions they're going to make to kind of navigate the quest and navigate the game. So it does take some kind of degree of creativity on the part of the facilitator to kind of be like, all right, well, I want them to think about parent voice. How am I going to get them to do that other than just saying, hey, Smith 2020, don't forget about this reading. Not that that isn't beneficial, but it really connects the practical and the real life to the research that we're engaging. So I would say that it's about being flexible as the instructor and really kind of opening yourself up to say, all right, well, I don't know what's going to happen. And boy, oh boy, for our classroom teachers who like things like they want to know what they need to do to get an A and how, they want to wrap it up and be done. Often at the end of the course, they're like, wait, I'm not ready to leave, Valeria. Is it okay? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Our 8 weeks are up, and so that also kind of makes it a challenging learning space, but fruitful, I think.
Thank you, Cynthia. Any other questions? We have time for one more if we want. Riva.
This is so exciting. I've done and back in the day, we called it in basket, where a problem would appear actually physically in your in basket. I just wonder how, and gaming is just so perfect for our late adolescents. I'm thinking about freshman, sophomore students. So one year I tried doing a kind of a Facebook spin-off, but I think this is so much more. So I'd love to see you expand it. So it wasn't a question. I would just, like everything I presented should go into a game.
Yep.
The next thing would happen. So
I'm so fascinated by what this would look like in like a math, an algebra class in high school. You have in games levels that students pass. And once you get past that level, you've saved the princess, you move on to the next level. You don't take a test to make sure you saved the princess. You've passed that level and you move on to the next level. I'm really intrigued by what that would look like for kids, particularly in middle and high school.
Okay, well, maybe we can come up with something to combine with what Sean Smith did earlier. All right.
I would argue
well,
you do. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I would argue you do take a test at saving the princess,
yeah, that's the test. Saving the princess is the test. So how are we saving the princess in a math class, I guess? Yeah, great point.
A nice point of collaboration. I think Hasan said we could use it for language learning as well. So I think you've inspired a lot of people to sort of think about maybe ways of doing this. So we'll see if we can maybe reach out and do some collaborations here. All right, Dorothy Hines is next. Dorothy?
Yeah, let me see if I can.
Great, and you should be able to share screen. Let me know if you have difficulty and then I'll get you started. All right, we got you, Dorothy. I'm going to hit start.
Okay.
Okay, go.
Oh. Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, my screen is just my screen. Okay, and so I'll be presenting on the topic of school discipline at a crossroads. And I'm in the Department of African American Studies and in the School of Education. And so my recently published co-edited book called Racism by Another Name, we argue that racism isn't just something that is historical, right? Racism is enduring, racism is fluid, and racism is flexible. As a society right now, we are sitting and positioned at a crossroads. We are at a racial crossroads. We are at a social political crossroad. We are at a fake news versus what is truth crossroads. But we are also at a crossroads in education. We are at a school discipline crossroad that has never been remediated. Each year it's duplicated and it's stitched together with the threads of racial inequality at its core. Data from the Office of Civil Rights data collection shows decade after decade that Black students remain more likely to be suspended for minor infractions than their racial counterparts. And this echoes for Black girls as well. And I'll be focusing on Black girls for this presentation. The literature tells us that Black girls are over-disciplined. Black girls are seen as dangerous bodies in the classroom. And eventually Black girls are pushed out of school. And so approaching this topic, I really wanted to think about how do Black girls who are at the crossroads of school discipline, how do they see the role of race and racism playing into the type of punishment that they receive? And so again, how do Black girls who are positioned at this crossroads of school discipline, how do they perceive of race and racism playing into the type of punishment they receive? I define this idea of a discipline crossroad is a student who has at least one out of school suspension. They have underachievement. And so in terms of GPA and grades below a C average, and also they have high levels of truancy. So meaning one or more a semester. And so these particular students, I'm saying, are triple marginalized. And so it's a combination of academic factors as well as being in school, but then also being pushed out of school. I do draw a lot from critical race theory. In particular for this project, I drew from critical race feminism and also using case study methodology. During the 2017-2020 academic year, I worked with a group of Black girls at Lawrence High School. And so for this particular initiative, I wanted to focus on Black girls who had been suspended out of school at least one time. And I say initiative because eventually it did turn into an actual group. And so after a while, me as well as a few other educators would meet with the girls as an actual class, more or less, that they would take. And so it started as a research project and then became an in-school initiative that they still have. Coincidentally, 7 of the girls that were identified were all identified for fighting, and they had been suspended out of school, some once for fighting, others multiple times. And so these 7 girls identified as Black, some were biracial, they were in grades 9th through 12th grade. And I did use snowball sampling in combination with the school social worker, as well as an assistant principal who helped to identify the girls to actually participate in this initial research study. There's 2 particular findings I want to mention very quickly. One being that there were 2 very interesting things that a lot of the girls said. And so these were done through semi-structured interviews as well as focus groups that I did with the girls during lunchtime. And so when the girls talked about how they experience discipline in terms of race and racism, they always use a comparison of, well, but the white girls who do this, they get treated differently. And so the girls were very aware that race and gender played a critical role, not just for them, but also in terms of how other students were disciplined. And so one finding that I was able to pull from a lot of the interviews is that there's this race-gendered response. And so what that means is that if you're a white female student, like you could see on the table, your femininity was viewed as being this sugar and spice and everything nice. And so your femininity, your performance of that was seen as innocence. In comparison, a lot of the Black girls who participated in this project, they were seen as aggressive. And so if they did anything in class, it wasn't, oh, let me give them the benefit of the doubt. It was something the girls intended to do, or it was perceived to be that. And it was always seen as being more harmful and more insidious than it really was. And so there was this race-gender response. Whenever a white female student would do something, they let out femininity, they were met back with femininity. In comparison, the Black girls, when they put out femininity, they were met with hyper-masculinity. And so the types of punishments that they received were hyper-masculine in nature. And then secondly, there was a racial severity spectrum. And so for a lot of the female students, white students, they mentioned in this particular project, they talked about how whatever the girls were disciplined for, it either equaled the policy standard or it was less than what the standards actually were for discipline. And so if I did something at school and I was a white female, I was never going to be punished in the way that the policy actually said, be it the teacher's policy or the district policy. And in comparison, for the Black girls that I work with, it was a totally different story. Every time they were disciplined, the discipline they received far exceeded what the policy actually stated. And so it wasn't just the fact that they were being over-disciplined and hyper-disciplined, but there was this severity of the spectrum of what that looked like and how that played into their schooling experiences. And so again, these are just two particular findings from a lot of that research. But I do hope that as this moves forward, that we are able to start to do professional development back to the teachers. And so as of now, this particular project, I collaborate with the school social worker and also other women of color in the community. We do workshops with the students to talk about health and wellness, to talk about applying to college, to talk about, you know, what are the things that we need to do to take care of our mind, our body, and also ourselves academically. And one of the things that I'm hoping is that as we continue doing this work, we're not just talking to just the students, but we're also able to give that information back to teachers so they can be more aware of what they're doing in the classroom, but then also aware of the policies said and unsaid that they enforce depending upon the racial and gendered identity that the students occupy while they're actually in their classroom. And so that's my presentation on how school discipline is really placing Black girls at a crossroads.
Thank you, Dorothy. All right, yeah, do the stop share and then a moment or two for questions. So a question from Dave Hansen. He came in late. Was wondering if are your findings also visible in school discipline data, or is that data not able to bring out these findings? So when you look at data.
That's a good question. And so initially, myself and a previous faculty member in special education, Subani Amana, we were working with the school district. And so they wanted to collaborate with a few individuals to actually help them interpret their data. And so one of the things that we did was look at school discipline. And so prior to actually going in the schools, we were able to meet with the equity director for the district, Danica Moore, and sit and think about, okay, what is this data showing us? And obviously we saw these racial as well as gender inequalities in discipline were very apparent. And so after first looking at the district data, then I had the opportunity to go actually into Free State High School for about a semester. I also went to 2 middle schools in Lawrence, and then finally was at the high school because they were having the most issues of racial disproportionality in school discipline at Lawrence High School. And so then that's where I initially set up and then move forward. So yes, data is always the part of everything that I try to do, not just looking at federal, state data, but also the local data and figuring out what are ways that we can try to change that around. So yes, to answer your question.
Hey, Lisa, just Dorothy, you may have seen this. There's a study done by one of the agencies in Texas. It was one of the legal related agencies that looked at suspensions, and there's 2 types of suspensions. There's mandatory suspensions. That's the bad things, like, you know, guns and drugs and awful things like that. And discretionary suspensions, the ones you're talking about, where administrators make, and when they broke it down by race, interestingly, white boys by far had the, blacks had far fewer mandatory suspensions, the bad things, by far.
Yeah.
And they had significantly more discretionary suspensions. So it speaks to racism on the part of school officials in terms of what they're doing, and the severe things that are mandated. It was far more whites than blacks. Very interesting. I'll share that with you if that'll be helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And even if you think about, and these are with boys, but the most recent case that's been on the news in New Jersey at a mall, there was 2 boys who got into a fight. One was black and one was white. Right. And when the police arrived, because obviously the police were called, the police went immediately to the black boy. And they pushed him face down on the ground, had a knee in his back, handcuffed him. And then the white boy, he was told he could sit on the couch. And this happened just about 10 days ago. And so it's just thinking about what are the ways that we are, even unconscious of racial bias, but it has detrimental effects for young people and particularly for Black girls in schools.
I want to be really mindful of time. We have some other questions, and if folks, and there might be other questions for some of the other presentations as well. So what I'd like to do is to keep moving, and then at the end of this whole thing, to open it up for everyone for questions, and we can cover some other ones. I just want to make sure that we stay on time, but there are other questions, Dorothy, that you've inspired a lot of folks to have a lot of good thought and a lot of good questions. So we can come back to those if that's okay with folks. Our next presentation is actually a group presentation, and I think Sriopa, are you the one who's going to give the presentation? I'll let you introduce it, but this is well, I'll just turn it over to you, and you should be able to share your screen, I think, and I'll keep your time, and I'll do the same 251, etc.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you so very much to everyone who are here to listen to this. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Cynthia. The presentations I attended were wonderful. Let me just share my screen if I can. This presentation comes. My name is Rupa Sanyal. Can you all see my screen?
Gotcha. Yep.
My name is Rupa Sanyal, and I'll be doing the presentation on behalf of my team. The data for this study were collected by Dr. Susan Twombly in an ELP program, and Dr. Poggio, who was the instructor for EPSI 814, shared this data with us. We analyzed, and therefore we as students of Dr. Poggio are presenting this data to you. So our purpose was to identify significant predictors towards a doctoral degree program of study. For the purpose behind this study was to understand which types of students are likely to choose a doctorate of education program or a doctorate of philosophy program. And one of the goals was to help the university streamline the recruitment process. So this data was collected from 121 SOEHS doctoral students based on a survey that SOEHS had developed. As you can see, the sample were overwhelmingly domestic US students, and more than half were pursuing an EDD program of study during the time that this data was collected. There were 5 predictor variables: a sense of belonging, participation in SOEHS activities, perceptions of advisor support, DEIB experience in classroom, and experience with discrimination. The socio-demographic variables that were collected were year of the study, gender of the students as an international or domestic student, and this data was used to address the strongest and the weakest discriminators between graduate students that had chosen to study toward a PhD program versus an EDD program. As you can see on the chart, international status of the student and discrimination were related significantly positively to the program of study, whereas SOEHS participation and sense of belonging were related negatively. These are significant findings. The statistically significant predictors of enrollment in an EDD or a PhD program included internationality and participation in SOEHS activities. From the data, we saw that international students are likely more likely to be enrolled in an EDD program vis-a-vis a PhD program. Additionally, when satisfaction regarding participation in SOEHS activities and programs were held constant, international students displayed 18.86 times higher odds to enroll in an EDD program vis-a-vis a PhD program. The graph that I'm going to share with you now displays the probability of enrolling in an EDD program given the level of satisfaction in participation in SOEHS events based on the student being an international or a domestic. The probability, as we can see, although the probability of being an EDD student increase when satisfaction in SOEHS event, this increases more for international students than for domestic ones. We didn't find any issues of multicollinearity in our data. Also, we had no outliers present, though our sample was overwhelmingly domestic US residents, and also a little more than half of our sample were EDD students. Socio-demographic factors did have a significant influence on the type of programs that students chose to study. To conclude, we think the financial aspects of the EDD program versus a PhD program is one of the reasons why we see this kind of an outcome. Moreover, the length of the two programs could also be a reason why international students were vying more towards an EDD program versus a PhD program. As you can see, we definitely have some limitations as to our samples. Future studies, we hope future studies will take our findings into consideration, and we'll have a more representational student sample to sample from, and also the variables like the cost and the affordability of the study program could be held constant to see why these kind of why do international students vie towards an EDD program rather than a PhD program. And this was our study. Thanks to Dr. Poggio and to Dr. Twombly for sharing this data with us and to analyze and to give us a sense of where we are with regards to the degree choice problem for international versus domestic students. Thank you so very much. Also, we have the paper, we have a paper present, we have a proper paper. If any of you are interested in our findings, please email me. I'll drop my email in the chat box, and or Dr. Poggio, and I'll be happy to share it with you all. Thank you so very much for coming and giving us your patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have been familiar with this data and as well as EDD and PhD programs. I wonder if you might have something backwards. And I'm just going to ask it this way. So EDD program students often, international students often are not EDD students because the programs are geared for, you can only enroll in 6 hours, for example. They're paced, they're cohorted programs with 6 hours, and an international student has to be enrolled in at least 9 hours. So the programs are specifically don't sort of work for the visa requirements of an international student. So there's not a whole lot of international students in our EDD programs for that technical reason. But you were saying that EDD programs are better suited for international students. So I'm wondering how that's possible, because in fact, there's almost no overlap. Most 99.8% of our international students are PhD students, not EDDs. So did you say that backwards or?
No, actually that was something that stunned us also. We were like, how is this possible? But then we were doing some research, some literature seemed to suggest that the duration of the program with regards to visa, the duration of the program, and also affordability, the cost affordability might be a reason for what we are seeing. Also, as if you can see our sample, we had more than half of the students who were in the EDD program and an overwhelming amount of students who were domestic students. We didn't really see.
Right, that's what I'm saying. There are international, very few, you take the 3 EDD programs, there's very few international students in there. So there's some we could talk to Dr. Podio. Something statistically weird is happening there, but we can explore that more. But what I'm happy about is that a class in ELPS was able to collect data that a class in EPSI were able to use and that's really lovely collaboration. So that's awesome.
Thank you so very much.
Any other questions?
Was students L1 a variable in the
Oh, yeah.
study? I don't think so. No, we didn't ask for the students. We just asked them whether they were international or domestic. The L1 status was not. And that's the reason why I talk about that future studies have to take certain other variables into account while running our analyses, because these variables weren't enough. And thank you for that question. That was a very important question.
Any other questions? Brian, you ready to round this thing out? Bring it home.
Okay, I think so. Step one is making sure I can share my screens.
Right? I've discovered
that.
the pitfalls of that. There you go. We got it, Brian.
That's a Stone Pony, New Jersey, and that's gone. Okay, can you
All right.
see that? Can you see, if I have a pointer, can you see the pointer too? The little.
Yep.
All right. Okay.
Go for it.
All right. Well, thank you for attending my presentation. My name is Brian Mann, and I'm an assistant professor in ELPS. And my paper is titled Education Markets in a City with Changing Racial Demographics, Exit Choice Disloyalty, and the Inequality of the Long Game. And just a quick thank you. It was in part funded by a summer writing grant from the School of Education and Human Sciences and of the Spencer Foundation. So the setting here is in Washington, D.C., which has seen two big changes in the last 20 years. The first is massive gentrification, which is where typically white, wealthy residents move in mass into neighborhoods inhabited by residents of color. And the second is school choice. So Washington, D.C. has a system-wide, at-scale school choice lottery in which all the traditional public schools and charter schools are entered, and all the families and students in the city can participate in, and most indeed do. So I explored how these changes, these two changes kind of come together and shape school racial segregation in the city, and why they did so. So my study is a mixed method study. It's a sequential explanatory design. This is where you start with quantitative methods to uncover patterns, and then you follow up with qualitative methods to try and uncover the reasons for these patterns. And then after that, you kind of bring them together and try to understand what merging them can tell you that one of the methods in isolation alone could not. I framed the paper around classic theory and political science, which is Hirschman's exit, voice, and loyalty theory. And for this presentation, I'm going to focus on four overarching questions that I sought to answer in this project overall. The first is, where are the popular schools in Washington, D.C., and are they racially segregated? So for that, many of you know that I like maps, so here you go. Here's a map of these patterns. So just for some context, this area right here that I'm highlighting is a traditionally wealthy area of the city. Think Georgetown. And if you look at this map, basically, if it's a red dot, it's a traditional public school, and if it's a blue dot, it's a charter school. And the size of the dot corresponds with the number of students on the wait list for that school. And so in Washington, D.C., in the traditional wealthy area of the city, there were no charter schools, and there were extremely popular traditional public schools. In the kind of the central part of the city, these are the areas that have gentrified. And so there's some interesting patterns here. There's some popular charter schools and some popular traditional public schools, but there's a mix of both. And these schools qualitatively tend to be boutique schools. They're specialized, they're Montessori, they're dual language, and things like that. And then in the southeast of the city, there are a number of charter schools. There are far fewer popular schools, and the schools that are there reflect strict discipline, their network charters, and things like that. And so it's not shown on this map, but the statistical segregation findings show that there are a few diverse elementary schools in the city, but these schools come at a cost for increasing racial and economic segregation across the city overall. And I point this out because there are folks in the literature that point to these few diverse schools as opportunities for integration without looking at the system-wide effects of greater low-income concentration and greater segregation in other areas of the city. The other questions that I sought to answer qualitatively were how do white parents navigate the ungameable lottery to shape these patterns? I pulled white parents from this. There were 11 of them from a larger sample. And the lottery was made by a Nobel Prize winning economist, and they boast that it's ungameable. Well, I found through my research that the parents found a way to game the lottery. The most popular gaming strategy was to play the lottery every year, and until they get the feeder pattern schools that they wanted. So there were multiple entries into the lottery. Other strategies included in-boundary preference, getting a second apartment in another part of the city, buying and making strategic real estate decisions. So then the next question is, why did they interact with the lottery in this way? In short, having a choice made parents perpetual choosers. They didn't use voice to change what they didn't like. They just constantly chose. So it's interesting. In the theory, loyalty is a norm that causes exit. Here in DC, I found disloyalty was the norm, and people were much more prone to exit rather than use voice. They didn't even consider voice as an option. Parents were also worried about logistics. A big worry was feeder patterns. But the worry of feeder patterns was fear of racialized presumptions of quality and safety. And so my concluding thoughts are, what are the effects of this lottery on the school ecosystem as a whole? For one, it recast racial segregation in new ways. It created less buy-in at the school level. There was no need for voice when parents had choice. And academic quality indicators were less suggestive of popularity than race at the school level, which has led to more racial segregation. I thought that was interesting too. And so with that, I will wrap up, and thank you, and I'm open for any questions. I will unshare my screen.
I have a quick question. And so what does this suggest in communities where, like in Boston, there's been this resurgence of neighborhood schools and the politics of that? So what does this mean for proponents and opponents of neighborhood schools?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what it suggests is neighborhoods. So neighborhood schools typically come with administrative decisions around school enrollment. And so administrators can take into account these types of things as they're determining boundary lines. And so for a place like Boston, well, there's a lot of other things in Boston with their choice too. But I would say in general for the neighborhood schools, it suggests that neighborhood schools perhaps have more control in undermining issues of segregation through administrative decisions that don't happen through a choice marketplace. And so, yeah, that's how I'd answer that question in terms of neighborhood schools. In Boston too, there's other weighted lotteries that they're trying to undermine some of these patterns that happen in DC, and there's a lot of research that's trying to determine if those are effective or not as well.
Brian, there was a question from Doug Huffman that the Kansas legislature is debating new school choice system. And so what are your thoughts about Kansas?
Yeah, so my thoughts about Kansas in general, first of all, school choice, a lot of advocates argue leads to greater opportunities for integration or diversity, and that just has not borne out in the literature. So if that's an argument that the legislature is making, that's one that is not supported by research. In terms of Kansas, in particular, their focus on a voucher program. I don't think that there's going to be a widespread effect in much of the state because of a lack of the ability to operate two schools in rural areas, for example. So one thing that people don't recognize with choice is, first of all, there needs to be, it's a supply and demand question. And so often I always say 2 schools are more expensive than running 1 school. And so a lot of the places that a voucher might touch don't exist in a lot of Kansas school districts. And where they do, what it will probably happen is incentivize behavior that already exists. So those parents that are already going to private schools will probably be subsidized for the private school choices that they're already making. It probably won't shape or induce additional behaviors. Yeah.
So Doug added 80% of counties in Kansas don't have private schools. And then Daniel Thomas wrote lots of literature on the rise of segregation academies in relationship to contemporary school choice discourse.
Yeah, that definitely, especially where I was before here in Alabama, that was a huge conversation where we were incentive. I mean, a lot of school choice in places like Alabama started because of the desire to not participate in desegregation. And so some of the historic trajectories of private schools where they started as segregation academies, and those patterns, although they're not called that, still continue to this day in a lot of those places.
Great, thank you, Brian. I want to actually open it up for anyone to ask anyone questions. I know there were a couple folks who had questions for Dorothy. People might be able to, there might be some cross-fertilization kind of questions that have popped up. We don't have a ton of time, but we do have a little bit for that. So feel free to chime in with a question to any of our panelists if you'd like.
Hello.
Hello, who's speaking? Lauren?
Yeah, it's Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
Hello, everyone. So I am directing this question towards Dr. Hines. I wanted to know, in regards to thinking about teacher education, how do we utilize your work in intersectionality, critical race feminism, in addressing, right, the push out of Black girls in PK through 12?
Thank you, Lauren. Dorothy?
Uh-oh.
No, I got it. I was like, whoa, I cannot hit this button.
It's the Zoom problem, right?
Well, I mean, there's several different approaches, right, to doing ed research. You have some scholars who research with teachers. I'm the type of scholar who researches with students. And so what I hope to be able to influence teacher ed is actually through the in-school community. And so I do not publish scholarship or do scholarship just to be read in a textbook in the undergrad classroom in CNT. I want to make sure that it's being something that is driven home to in-service teachers as well. And so one way obviously is through the course readings that we have. And so when students are taking our courses, making sure that they are learning about disproportionality and racial bias, not just within one particular class, but it's embedded throughout the curriculum. Because I can offer a class on school discipline and racial disparities, but then if the other 150 credit hours are not about that or actually counter that, it's not going to stick like it really needs to get change. And so for me, it's about having the information, the literature through the coursework. It's also about addressing in-service teacher training and professional development, which oftentimes isn't development, it's clock time, right? And so I think it really takes a multi-pronged approach with the literature, the coursework, also with getting in schools, teaching teachers how to even look at discipline data. A lot of teachers don't know how to read data. So it's going to take, I believe, a multi-pronged approach. But where I fit in there is really addressing what students are experiencing and making sure that that is understood and seen through a teacher's lens. And so I'm more of that area, really honing in on the narratives of students and making sure that those are highlighted and also understood and create changes through the teacher's curriculum and eyes. So I'm kind of one of the other type of people. I don't spend 100% of my time just doing teacher training, but I appreciate your question.
Dorothy, so you said that you were working with a group at Lawrence High School. How has that been perceived by folks? I know I'm sure it's of help to the students, but in terms of the administration or the teachers in the school, are the people aware of it? Are they supportive of it? Have you found pockets of support there? for it?
Well, when I initially was at Lawrence High School, I had to give a presentation in front of the principal. So you have a principal, then you have several assistant principals, and they were all white, and only one was a white female. And they were on board because they were about racial equity and justice. And so once they're on board, you have to have buy-in. Then I was able to connect with a few other people inside the school building. And so the students would miss class time to come meet with me one-on-one. The students would miss class time and instead be with me, and I would provide them lunch. And so it was one of those things that it was trying to get towards the end goal. And so if the end goal meant I have to let the student miss a little bit of class, but it's going to help them on the back end, teachers were all about that. Because a student's not going to sit and learn from you if they don't trust you, if they don't think you care, about them actually being there. And so we needed to reestablish that first. And teachers were all on board with that because who wouldn't be?
Great, thank you. And then Dorothy, one more question. Hassan asked a question about how class and SES intersect with racialized and gendered identities of the Black girls in your study.
Oh yeah, so that was a huge thing. And so several other girls, I think it was one, she had a 2-parent home, but she had moved from Florida. And as soon as she moved that spring of that year at Lawrence High School, she had been in juvie several times, elementary school, she had been locked up as well. And she came from a 2-parent home. But for the rest of the girls, they were mostly from single parent homes, mother working 2 jobs or on food stamps. And so it was really a variety of students coming from a variety of groups, but they were definitely, all of them were low income, but one did come from a 2-parent home. Because oftentimes people associate low income with single parent, but you also can have 2 parents and still be low income as well.
Thank you for that. And what, Cheryl, one more last, you get what you asked the last
Yeah,
question.
this is a quick one. Thank you. Dorothy, in looking at the end goal or local data, did you have a chance to look at graduation rates, for those young ladies that you worked with?
Yeah, that's a good question, because a lot of the girls were not supposed to graduate.
Right.
And so these were girls who had been suspended for fighting, and many of them, it was multiple times. Yeah. So they had failed multiple classes. And I think what really turned it around was giving them an additional space in which they could tell me anything and know it was confidential. Obviously, if they were doing something harmful, I would have to share that. But they felt like they had an actual space that was their space for the first time. Because although they were in school, they didn't feel like that was their space. And so once we created that, me and 2 other graduate students, Jennifer Romott, Ed Leadership Policy Studies, and William Garcia in American Studies, then it was able to, they love going to school. And they would literally show up like, hey, is William here? Is Dr. Hines here? And so for us, it was about developing relationships with them, making them enjoy and love learning in school again. And thankfully, all of the girls except one, but the other 6 were able to graduate. 2 of them went to community college, and then the one that did not graduate, unfortunately, she did end up getting locked up in a detention center. But the social worker and I still kept in contact with her, and still haven't given up.
Yes,
so yes,
thank you.
Actually graduate.
Excellent, thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I saw there's a question for Brian, but Brian answered it in the chat. So I want to thank everyone. I'm going to turn this over to Dean Ginsburg for just a moment. He's going to close us up. I personally want to thank everyone for their participation and for being here on a sunny and a little bit cold, but soon to be warmer Friday afternoon. And appreciate everyone following my 1 slide rule and my 5-minute rule. I really appreciate that. I know that's hard. And so I'm just very, very appreciative of everyone. Rick, you can close us out.
I will. And again, I want to reiterate Lisa's thanks. We've been doing this for 4 or 5 years now. And this is the first time everybody was like, some of you used 1 slide and incorporated multiple slides into one. So I love the creativity there. But everybody stuck to the timer. So either Lisa's getting nastier and you're paying more attention, or people are getting better at it. But this is the thing I love about this is that, we're all so siloed in our work. And this gives us a way to break down some of those silos to see what our colleagues are doing. There's a lot of amazing things happening in research and teaching across the school. And perhaps this can lead to ways for us to collaborate together more on shared areas of interest and topics. And there was some of that obviously here today. Some of you who were around a while ago recall that at one of our face-to-face retreats years ago, we did a speed dating thing where we had people kind of present their research, and the idea was to lead to more collaboration. So any thoughts or ideas you have about breaking down our silos, that's both within departments and across departments, I would appreciate that. And we will certainly keep doing this going forward in the future. I did send out a draft of this faculty bonus pay program for buyouts from grants. If we have any feedback, get it back to me and we'll get you all the final version of that in the next couple of weeks. And again, I just want to close with thanking you all for your very hard work that's going on this semester. The trends are moving in the right direction, and who knows, maybe in a couple of weeks, we'll actually have our masks off face to face and be around one another again, a little respite, maybe like we had last summer. I know we're all hoping for that. And again, just want to reiterate that there are things happening around the world that put a pall on a lot of the work that we're doing. And I really hope that we do, if you know of students that can use our support, or any of you or any staff members, please let us know. We'll do what we can to support people. We have a state that has its challenges, a country that certainly has its challenges, in a world that seems to be out of its mind. And the only way we get through that is get through it together. Thank you all for being here on a Friday afternoon. Lisa, thank you and the team for all the work you did, and the presenters. This is not easy to take a really long, drawn out piece of research and get it down into 5 minutes in such an interesting and thoughtful way as you all did. So thank you all very much. Have a great, take the next 2 days off, everybody. It's a weekend. So thank you all. And we'll be back in touch. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. And think about presenting next year.
All right.
Thank you.